In the heart of London, a quiet industrial revolution was brewing, not of swords and shields, but of matches and courage. Strikes happened worldwide, but one of the first woman-led industrial strikes was the Match Girl Strike of 1888. In the summer of 1888, in Bow, London, England, home of many immigrants and a major spot of poverty, illness, and starvation, a group of young women working at the Bryant and May Match Factory embarked on a heavily impactful strike led by Annie Besant, Herbert Burroughs, Sarah Chapman, and many more. The Match Girl Strike of 1888 was a pivotal strike that fought to get more pay and a healthy working environment for the female workers. As a result, the Match Girl Strike gave female workers the right to protect their working conditions, forced businesses to provide workers with responsible pay, and inspired other industrial workers to fight for their labor rights.
Before the Match Girl strike, the women and young girls who worked in the Bryant and May Match Factory were under horrible conditions. The Bryant and May Company said, "Never mind their fingers," as the workers were forced to operate dangerous machinery. Working 14 hours a day, they only got 2 short breaks, and any unscheduled breaks would deduct money from their already small paychecks. Many of the women had a condition known as phosphorus necrosis, or more commonly called phossy jaw, an infectious disease that causes the jawbone to rot away, which was caused by breathing in white phosphorus constantly throughout their long days while making the head of the matches. With little desire to change and compromise on profit margins, Bryant and May continued to employ thousands of women and girls in its production line. The matchmaking business was booming and the market for it continued to grow.
Bryant and May didn't care their workers were dying of phossy jaw and continued to subject the workers to the poor working conditions so they could keep making good money. Each woman and girl worked 12 to 14 hours a day in a hot, unventilated room to make and pack matchboxes in order to earn an average wage of around 8 shillings per week. Bryant and May had these women working in unbearable conditions with extremely low pay just to make profit. With many young women dying each year from white phosphorus, or women getting their fingers cut off and going home with only enough money to buy dinner for that night, Bryant and May were making money with their buzzing business, and that's all they cared about. The Match Girls continued to work under these perishable conditions for many years, until people found out about it and wanted to make a difference.
On July 5th, 1888, 200 women who worked for Bryant and May Match Factory walked out, due to one of the workers, Eliza Martin, getting fired for giving confidential information about their working conditions to a reporter, Annie Besant. Besant wrote an article on the link talking about the Match Girls, calling it "White Slavery in London." In the article, she revealed the terrible working conditions and low wages suffered by the young women and girls employed at the factory. And Bryant and May were trying to cover it up and have the girls deny the accusations. But instead, the women revolted and walked out. Soon after, the other 1,400 women also walked out. The Match Girls walked out because of the low wages, long hours, the dangerous white phosphorus, and unfair treatment. As they marched down the streets, the workers told their horrifying stories and gave the people of the town an unforgettable impression of the poverty and mistreatment they had to endure. For the 16 days of the strike, the factory sat idle and production stopped. In addition to that, Bryant and May were getting extensive bad publicity because most of the town was taking the woman's side and the pressure began to mount. The bosses were forced to compromise just weeks later, offering improvements in both pay and conditions. On July 21st, 1888, Bryant and May ended the strike by compromising on the women's key conditions. The pennies should be restored or an equivalent advantage given in the system of payment. Thanks to the brave girls who stepped forward and had the courage to leave the factory, and Annie Besant for exposing their ruthless working conditions, the women's work at the Bryant and May Match Factory earned improved labor rights.
After the match girl strike, the workers finally received the rights they demanded and the responsible pay they fought for. With the help of socialist and women's rights activist Annie Besant, they were able to increase wages, minimize certain health risks, and generally improve the work environment. Furthermore, all the women who got fired were hired again. The women were no longer fined for tiny infractions. The women got a more responsible pay with a $6.10 increase, and the women were given a dedicated break room where they could eat breakfast without being near the toxic white phosphorus. This was the first time a union of unskilled workers had succeeded in striking for better pay and working conditions in London. Will Thorne led a London strike of gas workers in 1889, and later that year, the London dock strike was led by Ben Tillett. 2 decades after the match girl strike, the White Phosphorus Act of 1908 was passed, banning factories to use white phosphorus and to use the alternative red phosphorus, which was extremely less toxic and is still used on the matches today. Because the match girl strike was one of the first strikes, it heavily influenced the other industries to copy what the match girls did and to fight for better rights and responsible pay. The match girl strike showed how big of an impact standing up for your basic rights was, and it also gave them a better working environment with safer rules that beneficially impacted their health and well-being.
Even though the women won, some people may think that the match girl strike wasn't a pivotal strike that gave women rights and responsibilities, because Bryant and May didn't stop using white phosphorus for another 2 decades until the White Phosphorus Act of 1908 was passed. But they would be wrong, because the match girl strike had provided an impetus for other working class labor activists to set up other unskilled worker unions in a wave that became known as New Unionism. The 1888 match girl strike had paved the way for other important changes in the industrial setting, but more still needed to be done.
And however, they were wrong, and despite going without wages for multiple weeks, the women remained resolute in their fight for women's rights. In conclusion, the match girl strike in 1888 was a pivotal movement in London for industrial workers, as it was one of the first fights for women's rights. These young women faced many hardships and challenges during the strike. For example, they had to go home all those 16 days of strike without any pay. Although, in the end, the strike was a success, granting workers with the right to protect their working conditions, forcing Bryant and May Match Factory to provide workers with responsible pay, and inspiring other industrial workers to fight for their labor rights. The match girl strike is a great example of rights and responsibilities because before the strike, women worked in an extremely unhealthy environment, breathing in toxic chemicals, working 14 to 16 hours a day, having minimal rights, and not having responsible pay. However, after the strike, the working environment drastically changed, allowing the women to be more safe and workers to get a responsible pay, better working rights, and inspiring other industrial workers to fight for their labor rights. As John Charlton said it best, they were young, loud, confident, and they won.